Welcome to Closer to Venus. This is Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Tyler Stevens, a parapsychology researcher for the Rhine Research Center, an astral projection and extraterrestrial contact enthusiast. Today, we're going to be talking about astral projection and how to achieve an out-of-body experience. Tyler, welcome to the program.
Hey, Johnny. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
How did you get involved with the Rhine Research Center? And for our listeners that may not know what Rhine does, tell them a little bit about that as well.
Sure. The Rhine Research Center is a parapsychological research center in Durham, North Carolina. And really how I got involved was when I moved to North Carolina, I went to the Art Institute of Atlanta, had a precognitive dream that got me very interested in just a lot of the subjects. Moved to North Carolina about 8 years ago and learned about the Rhine Research Center. Just really headed over there and just started reading. Their library is just huge. If you can imagine Barnes & Noble, the spirituality section of their store, multiply that by probably 20. And they've got every subject that you can think of, from remote viewing, just ESP, astral projection, out-of-body experiences. And really they're focused a lot more on the research side of it. So J.B. Rhine was considered the first scientist really to explore this, bring it from the seance tables and all of the outside, the psychic readings. And he really wanted to understand it scientifically so that he could provide results in journals and get other scientists really working on more projects involving the subjects. So J.B. Rhine really was the pioneer in that regard to bringing it into a lab and doing just very simple tests. So it started out doing tests on just telepathy and clairvoyance using Zener cards. So Zener cards would be, if you look at 5 different cards with symbols on it, you'd flip them over and the tester would then try to guess which symbol was on those cards. Another very common test that he did was just rolling of the dice. So just roll the dice and the tester would guess which numbers were going to come up on those dice. And through that, I think it was around hundreds of thousands of tests, because he had so many subjects at Duke University that were interested in that. Once Duke transitioned to more of a religious type of education, J.B. Rhine took the research center and made it independent. So he stayed within Durham, but really wanted to keep the focus on parapsychology and that type of research.
Interesting how you mentioned that when Duke became more of a religious institution. Do you think the decision to make Rhine independent was kind of a fear that the religious component would actually interfere with the research or influence it in a certain way?
I do. And I think one of the issues was that his department was the most popular department in the entire school. So people were coming to Duke University just specifically to get educated on that subject and to work in some of these projects. And I'm not sure how the rest of the faculty felt about that, but I know there was probably some tension that came about, most likely resulted in him really trying to just keep the focus on those subjects and not have any outside influences on his results or anything that he was trying to post about.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you go to the website, you see the tagline, "Bridging the Gap Between Science and Spirituality." That tells me everything I need to know. And the religious aspect, that always comes up no matter what. I can see where that would be the type of thing that could provide a bit of a damper. So the Rhine is in the North Carolina area, obviously. And it also reminds me that Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was a pioneer in reincarnation research, was at the University of Virginia. Is it just a coincidence that the ACC schools had the most prominent centers for this type of research, or is that just a coincidence?
I think that there's really only a few places around the United States right now in terms of universities that have programs that are really studying parapsychology and those type of topics. And even for those, a lot of the times, some of the classes are labeled as something else, psychology or mindfulness. So there's a lot of terms that don't specifically point to parapsychology, but are associated with them. And I think some of the universities are getting there. But if we were looking at 20 or 30 years ago, you really couldn't, like in terms of right now, you can't get a parapsychology degree anywhere in the United States. So it's difficult if you're somebody young like myself and you want to get involved in the field, but you sort of have to establish your own credentials, and you can't come in with a degree and just start working.
Mm-hmm. Now, and the Rhine, and how many other research centers are like the Rhine, or is the Rhine Research Center pretty much one of a kind?
Well, there's some associations that are similar. So there's Parapsychological Association, the Society of Exploration. So there are some other associations. Also, IONS, I would say, is similar out in California. And they have a lot of researchers that are associated with those organizations. And really what I'm trying to do is get a collaboration and a network going so that a lot of these organizations can work together. And one of the issues that's been going on in the field is just an issue of replication. So if one researcher does a very significant study that has great results, there aren't a lot of other research organizations that want to backpack off of that and do another study that's similar so that it can solidify those results. And so that's really an issue. And another issue I would say is funding. A lot of these organizations really have a problem with funding and being consistently able to get revenue to just keep them afloat. Just paying for the building for them to do their operations is sometimes tough. A lot of them rely on donations and some programs here and there, but most of them don't really have a product or anything they can sell that would bring in consistent revenue to keep them afloat.
So it's dependent on donors, benefactors, and such that recognize the growing importance of parapsychological research due to a lot of things that's going on in the world like today, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Regarding out-of-body experiences, and it's referred to as the OBE, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
Is an OBE and astral projection the same thing, or are they related, or how does that work?
Sure. One of the most common questions, and I'll even throw in lucid dreaming in there as well, is what's the difference between astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and lucid dreaming? So the difference between astral projection and out-of-body experiences is essentially that astral projection is a practice. So you practice astral projection, you get in deep meditation, and you get in a trance and relax yourself and to have an out-of-body experience. So the experience itself that you're looking to have is an out-of-body experience. So you would use astral projection to achieve an out-of-body experience. And the difference from lucid dreaming is an experience where you're actually inside of a dream, you're asleep and you're in a dream, and then while in the dream you realize that you're dreaming and sort of become aware that you're inside of a dream. And all three are very much related to each other, but they are different in that aspect.
Does an OBE occur when someone is able to access the Akashic records? Is that possible?
I have read stories. There were a couple of books where a few authors have been able to access that. So there's a whole line of different type of experiences, from meeting extraterrestrials to dead loved ones to being able to travel to someone that you currently know and look around their place. So the experiences are very vast. I myself have not had an experience with the Akashic records, but I've heard authors that have been able to access that.
You're right. It is a vast subject, and I have not heard anyone talk about that quite yet, but it's probably only a matter of time. So the out-of-body experience does occur in really deep meditation, or can it occur in other modes or other ways?
Sure, it can definitely occur spontaneously. For spontaneous out-of-body experiences, they can happen while you're sleeping, while you're just taking a nap. For the astral projection, what the difference is in a spontaneous out-of-body experience is astral projection, you have the intention of going in and going to sleep and having your astral body or having an out-of-body experience. So another way I would say would be just a spontaneous out-of-body experience. That was how I had my first out-of-body experience. Was I was researching astral projection, practicing it here and there, but I didn't go to sleep with the intention of having an out-of-body experience and woke up sort of in that state and realized that I was outside of my body. So that was really the first out-of-body experience for myself.
And from what I understand, you can actually read books on how to do astral projection and how to achieve that out-of-body experience. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years and after reading books, there are very similar methods that are used. And there's, I would say, a line of experiences that happens to get you there. So I would really narrow it down to about three things. And it would be relaxation of your body, then quieting your thoughts and getting control of your concentration. And then the last would be getting yourself in that sort of out-of-body state or trance-like atmosphere where then you're able to consciously leave your body.
Now, you mentioned extraterrestrials earlier. How is astral travel related to extraterrestrial contact?
So in researching this, I've also been very interested in UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrial contact. And in reading a lot of I myself have not had an extraterrestrial experience out of body. I have had one extraterrestrial UAP experience in physical, which I can tell you about soon. But really, whenever I read something about somebody having an extraterrestrial experience that was out of body, I pay attention to it a little bit more because for me, it would just seem a little bit more authentic that the experience would take place there because it would just be a little bit higher form of communication with that person that extraterrestrials would have. My physical experience was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephen Greer, but Stephen Greer is somebody who maybe 20, 25 years ago started something that was called the Disclosure Project, where he would get military officials to come out and say that we need to research this. But he also came up with a method called the CE5 method, which essentially was a method where you would go out to a secluded place with no lights away from the city. And he had these crop circle tones that he had remade, which were recorded inside of crop circles. And you would play that pretty loudly and you would just kind of get into a deep meditative state and, things would happen in the sky. So I remember taking my brother out for the first time and I would do this by myself and have some experiences shooting stars and lights appear, move across the sky. But I think the most significant experience for me was when I went out with my brother one night and we were near the New England area. It was late at night and I brought him out and we started to do the process. And about 10 minutes in, he sort of asked the question, what's supposed to happen? And as soon as he said that, we both saw a light that appeared in the sky and it started moving slowly above us. And so I sort of took on my phone. I said, hey, check this out, and ended up flashing the object twice, and the object flashed twice back at us. And we sort of just kind of, our minds were blown at that point. And so I attempted it again, flashed it twice, and it flashed twice back at us, then slowly disappeared. So that was something where the experience itself was just really kind of life-changing, where you go out and consciously want to have an experience and then the experience actually happens.
And speaking of extraterrestrials or ETs, as we know them, how often do you suppose that ETs have been mistaken for angelic beings in our culture and other cultures?
I would say quite often, really. A lot of the experiences that would happen outside of body. So one thing that comes to mind right off the bat would be sleep paralysis. So a lot of people describe an experience where they sort of wake up from their sleep and they can't move and they're asleep and they feel like somebody is on top of them and holding them down. But essentially that is actually one of the stages to get to an astral projection is sleep paralysis. So a lot of the times people just go straight to a religious connotation or a meaning from that. And a lot of extraterrestrial experiences would happen to people where they don't really understand what's going on and they don't know any reference to any extraterrestrial stories or information out there. So really the only thing that they could relate it to were religious beings, stories that they would read. So I would definitely think that they could be mistaken for angels and or demons.
Yeah, angels and demons, of course. One thing I can't help but notice is that there seems to be a definite uptick in the interest of consciousness raising, spiritual awakening, but also things like astral projection and out-of-body experiences. Do you suppose that could be related to what we call the ascension, or moving from the third density to the fourth density or dimension, or the fifth dimension? Do you think that there's a connection there?
I think there could be a connection, absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed recently, and one of the ironic things that I always talk about in the field, is the popularity of the subjects in entertainment. So I just watched a show recently on Netflix that was called Behind Her Eyes, and it essentially was all about lucid dreaming and astral projection.
Really?
Yeah, it's a pretty good show.
The British show? The one with the cute au pair or whatever? I haven't seen it yet.
Yep, I would. Yeah, and so the few episodes in, it'll take a little bit to get going, but it's very similar to a lot of what you see in entertainment, TVs and shows, is a real focus on these subjects. But then if you turn around and you look at the actual research and the actual science that's being done, there's really not a lot of funding into some of these subjects. So it's a kind of a frustrating part of when you're actually trying to do the research and getting the information out there. And so I think that now that there are more TV shows and a lot of things that the younger generation is consuming, they're getting more interested in it and looking it up and seeing that, hey, this research has been going on for 50, 70 years. Maybe there is something behind it.
I would think so, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I tend to look at all these phenomena, near-death experiences, past life regression, or even the life between lives sessions, which are pretty intense. And the things we're talking about today, it seems to me that they're kind of all related, aren't they?
I would say so, yeah. And one of the organizations that I'm advising and involved with is organization called Consciousness and Contact Research Organization. And one of the things that they're really trying to do is to tie in essentially all of these experiences, near-death experiences, ESP, extraterrestrial experiences, tie them all together and really get them all involved in consciousness. And I think that's really the key, I think, to all this is once we start really focusing on the research on consciousness, I think it'll really tie in a lot of these experiences, because a lot of organizations tend to focus on one or two of the phenomenon. And it really does involve, if you read stories, even from near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, there's just so many correlations and similarities in those experiences that could be mistaken for either or experience.
You're right. And I was going to ask you that. What are the differences between the out-of-body experience and the near-death experience?
Well, I would say other than dying, than almost dying in your body, you're basically, for an out-of-body experience, you're not going through your body actually being dead, or essentially your brain is not functioning. And so when you look at the actual experience of what people talk about when they come back to and what they describe, it's very similar for each of those experiences, but it's tough to tell them apart if without the actual near-death part of it. And so when they're gone and they have witnesses of people that say, oh, well, you were gone for 5 minutes, there's no way you could have known what I was doing to your body. And so in that regard, when people come back and describe that, there are actual witnesses to the fact that they have been dead and they shouldn't know this information that they know. When an out-of-body experience is really more of a personal thing that people go through, and it's more just confirmation for them that their life is more than just physical.
It seems to me that you completely understand the importance of this type of research that Rhine does and other related research centers that focus on the paranormal and the parapsychological topics. But the problem is they're not selling anything. And that's why it's kind of hard to get funding, because I guess they have to find different ways to monetize it. But that's kind of a tough thing, because what are they supposed to sell?
Yeah, and
the memberships.
Exactly. Memberships and classes, online classes and donations. Although there has been recent developments, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bob Bigelow Aerospace, but he recently just started an organization that's focused on consciousness. And so about a month or two ago, he started a essay competition to provide evidence, and essay it would have to do with the afterlife. And the winner of the contest, it gets $500,000. Second place, $250,000. So I think he's somebody coming in that is wealthy. He's been a lot more focused, I think, in the UFO, UAP, extraterrestrial type of phenomenon. I would imagine that he has seen the correlations in the consciousness field. And so he's shifted a little bit of his focus over to the consciousness area, which I can definitely appreciate because it's been badly needed. I've always kind of said all it's going to take is $5 million for somebody to come in and they can essentially control this whole field. They can get involved in all the organizations and get on the boards and just sort of be in it. And so for somebody to recognize that and to come in is very much appreciated, but it's been long overdue in my opinion.
I agree. And if someone were to do that, $5 million sounds like a lot of money to some of us, but when we look at the purpose and the objective of this type of research, someone could basically take the shows that we see on Gaia, that type of content, and literally take it to another level. I love Gaia TV. I think it's great. There's lots of very, very cool stuff for people that are open-minded, but I think other people look at it more like entertainment. So I guess the overall objective for those of us that really want to push the movement further is to see that it's not looked at as just entertainment. But I guess that's a natural step in the progression of things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I recognized fairly quickly once I got into the field is, all of the researchers are extremely intelligent, very smart people. Unfortunately, they're not very good at marketing. And so when they do these significant research and have these results, it just is sent off to a journal and published in journals. And that's sort of it. And if you look at the younger generation, they're really not going to go on and read journals to find out this information. They're going to go on YouTube and consume that. And whatever's on YouTube is what they're going to take in. So, one of my things that I've really been trying to do in the field is expand a lot of these research centers' methods of promoting and marketing their material and their organizations so that it reaches younger people. I think that once researchers really embrace that and they let people know, a little bit more about themselves and what they're working on, definitely think that will help.
I agree. I think that's a really cool idea. Going back to the out-of-body experiences and astral projection, how is that related to remote viewing?
Sure. So remote viewing is a protocol in which you would get into a relaxed state and you would try to identify a target that was given to you. So a very simple example and an exercise that I give to any of my friends that I talk about remote viewing is if I just took a bunch of random magazines and I pulled out a picture and I put it inside of an envelope, and then I put that picture sort of in front of you, not the picture, but the envelope, and I asked you to draw what you thought was inside of that envelope. You'd take about 5 to 10 minutes to try and draw that, and then we'd compare it to the actual target. So for remote viewing, you're actually trying to identify a target. Now, the means of how you're going to receive that information could be very similar to an out-of-body experience, and that when you come back from an out-of-body experience, you still have to remember your experience. So one of the key things to work on is having a dream diary or some way to write down your experiences. So it's similar in that you're getting information and you're having to retain that information. And for remote viewing, you're having to express that information somehow so that you can confirm whether or not that target is accurate.
Remote viewing isn't necessarily something new. The military has been using that for quite a long time, haven't they?
Stargate program, I believe, was about a 20-year program in which we heard about Russia having some psychic spies. And so we wanted to get a program together in which we could essentially get into remote viewing and look at targets over and see some different results. Now, I've spoken with a few people that have been involved in the remote viewing program, and some of the stories that they tell of how accurate they were and the percentage of quote unquote hits when you are looking for a target and it's very similar to what your prediction is. It's essentially called a hit, and the percentage of hit rates from these gentlemen were really astounding. So it was 70 to 80% of the time they would be accurate in what they would be describing, which was pretty remarkable if you think about it.
Yeah, I would say so. What do you think are the main takeaways that our listeners need to know about astral projection and out-of-body experiences?
I just try to bring the conversation up every time about out-of-body experiences and just the history of out-of-body experiences, and that it goes back to really the beginning of humanity. If you look at stories, just all different types of books from the history and different traditions, there's a lot of references to out-of-body experiences, and astral projection is not anything to be fearful of, in my opinion. I think a lot of people, and you'll see if you end up watching the show, I love that the show touched on out-of-body experiences and astral projection, but you'll see that you'll leave with maybe a little bit of a fearful type of feeling towards it because of what may or may not happen. But I think that other than what is shown in entertainment, there's really not anything to be fearful of in trying it. And astral projection essentially is just getting into a very deep and relaxed meditation and using visualization to have an out-of-body experience. And that's really what got me so interested in the subject. I was just kind of confused as to why nobody else was really as interested as I was. And so I would always try and discuss it with people to find out if what they thought about it and if it was interesting. And so for me, it would just be to read a little bit more about the subject. And if you're already trying meditation, you're halfway there, because to me, meditation is the key to a lot of these experiences. Just practicing meditation consistently. I was talking to somebody that has out-of-body experiences but doesn't really want to have them. There's millions of people that want to be where you are right now, but I can understand how people that don't really want to have the experience and that keep having the experience. And I go back to sleep paralysis, I believe, is one of the most common experiences that people have that tie into out-of-body experiences and astral projection, and they become fearful of that experience. But in my opinion, that's one of the key stages in reaching the out-of-body experience is the sleep paralysis, and then you'll also hear sort of voices and noises, and then there's a deep vibrational state. So all three of those can sort of get you out of wanting to have the out-of-body experience. But if you're able to push through those three right there, you'll reach the out-of-body state and realize that there are a lot of experiences that you can have that are really life-changing. And there's different ways to teach people to do it. There's not just one way to do it. There's hundreds of methods that you could use. For example, you can visualize yourself climbing, having your astral body or spirit form climb up on a rope and climb up to the ceiling, or you can roll out of bed. So there's just a lot of methods that people use to reach that state.
Speaking of reading, are there any books that you would recommend, or are there just too many of them?
Well, I recommend any of the books on Robert Monroe. I consider him a pioneer for out-of-body experiences. And he's somebody who, for all intents and purposes, dedicated the later part of his life to not only researching out-of-body experiences, but researching methods that could help other people reach the out-of-body state. So he was able to develop something called binaural beats, which I think is helpful in reaching that state. So it's a sort of a relaxed music where there's different low frequencies that are going back and forth. So it's like a sort of throbbing going on in your head, and it gets you in a relaxed state and sort of focused on that, because one of the things that can get you out of that state is if your mind's wandering and your thoughts are kind of scrambled inside of your head. So Robert Monroe is definitely one. Also, I would recommend Graham Nichols is one where his approaches on astral projection are very interesting. He has more of a remote viewing type of view on astral projection, in that instead of our astral body going out and traveling, essentially what I got from the book was that our awareness and our consciousness is actually traveling out, and we're all encompassing everything that is in the astral realm, astral dimension, whatever you call it. And we're getting all of that information, but it's not essentially an astral body that's going out. So the information that you're getting is from your consciousness traveling in a large encompassing space. So Graham Nichols would be another one that I would recommend as well. And Robert Bruce is somebody who I've read before, who I think really has tapped into a lot of what people think about astral projection when they first get into learning about it. And a lot of it is just getting people over the hump of those fearful situations, because really when I had my first out-of-body experience, it sort of freaked me out, in that it took me about 6 to 8 months to have the courage to try it again because the first time that you have one, it's not the best experience that you could have when you're astral projecting. It's all new, and It's not the same as the 10th or the 15th time that you go out of body. It's a little bit confusing in that it's not exactly how you read about it. So you might not be able to see things, or you see things that might be uncomfortable for you. And there's sounds and vibrations and just your heart's racing a lot. So the first time that you have it could actually freak people out of really going through and following through with more experiences. But Robert Bruce is another one.
So in other words, the first out-of-body experience almost sounds like a really intense ride in an amusement park or something.
Oh, it
which,
yeah.
I don't know if that's a great analogy or not, but that's the impression I get. So if you can imagine if everyone would be able to do astral projection at will, what do you think our culture would look like?
I think it would be awesome. It would be a lot better place to interact with people. I don't think there would be that much judging. So if you look at 25, 30 years ago and people were having conversations about this, they would probably be outcasted, especially too with the extraterrestrial experiences. They weren't really accepted, not nearly as much as they are now.
They would be ostracized, in other words.
Yep, exactly. Right? And so I think that nowadays and going forward, you know, one of the things that I'm really focused on is just, for me, I can't convince you with evidence. I can't really convince anybody with evidence nowadays. So for me, if you are showing interest in the subject, what I'd want to teach you is to have the experience itself. If people are able to teach other people the experience and then they have the experience, it's just a deeper connection that each of us can have. So I think really my answer to that question would be everybody would have a better connection to everybody else because of these experiences.
There you have it. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us today. How can our listeners find you online?
Sure. Well, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and also my website is theastral.com. So THE and astral.com.
I will definitely put that and some of the other links in the show notes as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.